The moment my ex-wife saw my name on the wedding guest list, she should have canceled the ceremony. That was the first thing people heard the night Rebecca Hayes married Brandon Cole at the Crescent Ballroom in downtown Dallas, though nobody understood what it meant yet. The ballroom glowed gold beneath crystal chandeliers the size of pickup trucks, champagne towers stacked beside white orchids flown in from California, waiters in black tuxedos moving through the crowd like ghosts carrying silver trays worth more than my first car. Outside, valet attendants lined up Bentleys, Escalades, and imported sports cars beneath the hotel lights, while a string quartet played soft jazz near the marble staircase. Everything about the wedding screamed money. Old money. New money. The kind of money Rebecca used to say separated winners from men like me. I stood across the street under the cold November wind with my hands in the pockets of a charcoal overcoat tailored on Fifth Avenue, staring at the giant digital sign that read "Congratulations Rebecca" and Brandon in glowing white letters. 3 years earlier, Rebecca looked me dead in the eye and said, "I can't spend my life married to a mechanic who still smells like motor oil." Funny thing about humiliation is it never leaves your system completely. It settles into your bones like winter. Even standing there with a net worth bigger than most people inside that ballroom combined, I could still remember exactly how her voice sounded the night she walked out. Calm, sharp, certain, like she was reading a business forecast instead of ending a marriage. Back then, I owned a struggling garage outside Fort Worth, fixing transmissions and rebuilding engines 12 hours a day, while Rebecca chased luxury condos, rooftop dinners, and designer handbags I couldn't afford. Brandon Cole entered the picture 6 months before the divorce. Real estate developer. Perfect smile. Rolex that flashed every time he lifted a whiskey glass. Rebecca started coming home later. Started talking about ambition like it was something I lacked instead of something I sacrificed every day to keep food on the table. Then one Friday night, she slid divorce papers across our kitchen island while Brandon waited outside in a black Mercedes S-Class with the engine running. "You're a good man, Ethan," she told me, folding her arms like she was cold. "But good doesn't build the life I want." I didn't yell, didn't beg, didn't throw anything. I just looked past her through the front window at Brandon sitting behind the wheel, smiling at his phone while rain rolled down the glass. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. 3 years later, I watched the same woman prepare to marry the man she chose over me. Except tonight, there was one detail neither of them knew yet. 72 hours earlier, my investment group finalized the acquisition of Cole Development Holdings. Brandon just hadn't been informed he no longer owned his company. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A text from my attorney. "Everything is signed. You're clear to proceed." I read it once, slipped the phone away, and looked back at the ballroom glowing against the Dallas skyline. Through the giant windows, I could see Rebecca laughing beside Brandon beneath thousands of dollars in wedding lights, completely unaware the happiest night of her life was about to become the most expensive mistake she ever made. I crossed the street slowly, the polished leather of my shoes tapping against wet pavement while downtown traffic hummed somewhere behind me. Dallas smelled like cold rain and expensive perfume drifting from the ballroom entrance every time the doors opened. Valets moved quickly beneath the canopy lights, greeting guests by last name, collecting keys to cars worth more than the little garage where Rebecca and I spent the first 6 years of our marriage trying to survive. Funny how life works. Back then she used to complain whenever my hands smelled like engine grease at dinner. Said it embarrassed her when we went out in public. I remember one night at a steakhouse in Arlington. She stared across the table at a guy wearing a navy suit and a gold watch while I sat there in work boots after a 14-hour shift rebuilding a transmission. "Do you ever think bigger than this?" she asked me quietly while the waiter poured water into crystal glasses. I thought she meant dreams. I did not realize she meant money. The ballroom doors opened again, and warm light spilled across the sidewalk as another wave of guests entered laughing beneath umbrellas. A woman in a silver gown glanced at me, then looked again when the valet handed back the keys to my Aston Martin. People judge fast in places like this. 3 years ago, they would have seen a tired mechanic standing alone in an off-the-rack suit. Tonight, they saw someone else entirely. The strange part was I still felt like the same man underneath it all. I gave my coat to the attendant inside the lobby and stepped into a sea of marble floors, golden chandeliers, and polished champagne glasses reflecting soft light across the ceiling. Somewhere above the crowd, Sinatra played through hidden speakers. The Crescent Ballroom looked less like a wedding venue and more like a movie set built for people who wanted the world to envy them. Rebecca always loved rooms like this. Places where everybody smiled too hard and measured each other by watches, handbags, and zip codes. I moved through the crowd unnoticed at first. Investors, attorneys, real estate executives, men with silver hair discussing markets over bourbon, women wearing diamonds that caught the light every time they laughed. Then I saw Brandon near the center bar, one hand resting confidently in his pocket while he shook hands with a group of developers. Same perfect haircut, same politician smile. He looked relaxed, untouchable. That confidence almost made me smile because 72 hours earlier his entire empire stopped belonging to him. He just had not heard the final phone call yet. Rebecca stood nearby in a white satin gown beneath the ballroom lights, and for a second I understood exactly why I fell in love with her years ago. She still carried herself like she belonged in magazines. Calm posture, sharp eyes, elegant smile. But there was something colder in her now than before. Something polished down into performance. The old Rebecca used to laugh barefoot in our tiny kitchen while country music played through a broken speaker on the counter. The woman standing across the ballroom tonight looked like someone who had traded every soft piece of herself for appearances. Then her eyes found mine across the crowd. The smile disappeared instantly. It was subtle. Most people would not have noticed. But I did. Her champagne glass paused halfway to her lips while confusion flickered across her face like a light trying to stay alive in a storm. Brandon followed her stare a second later. His expression tightened. Not fear. Not yet. Just surprise. Because men like Brandon only notice other men once they become impossible to ignore. I adjusted the cuff of my black suit and walked toward them slowly while conversations faded around me one voice at a time. The closer I got, the quieter the room became. Not completely silent, not yet, but enough for people to start noticing the shift in energy moving through the ballroom like cold air under a door. Brandon recovered first. Men like him always do. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin slightly, and smiled the kind of smile executives practice in mirrors before investor meetings. "Ethan," he said, extending one hand while the other tightened around his whiskey glass. "I honestly did not think you would come." His voice carried confidence, but there was strain underneath it now. Tiny cracks beneath polished marble. Rebecca stood beside him frozen for half a second too long before forcing her own smile back into place. "You look different," she said carefully. Funny word, different. 3 years earlier she used to look at me like I was unfinished drywall in a luxury home she regretted buying. Tonight she looked at me like she was trying to solve a math problem nobody warned her would be on the test. I shook Brandon's hand once. Calm. Firm. "Congratulations," I told them both. "Beautiful wedding." Rebecca glanced down at my suit, my watch, then toward the ballroom entrance where 2 men in tailored navy jackets had just walked in behind me. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she recognized one of them. Arthur Mercer, senior partner at Mercer Capital. The kind of man whose face appears in business magazines beside headlines about billion-dollar acquisitions. Brandon noticed him too. I watched the color shift in his expression almost instantly. "You know Arthur?" he asked too quickly. "We work together sometimes," I said. That was technically true. Mercer Capital owned 31% of the holding company that now controlled Brandon's entire development empire. Before Brandon could respond, Arthur approached us carrying a champagne flute with the relaxed confidence of a man who had spent his life around money. "Ethan," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "I was wondering when you would finally make your entrance." Then his eyes shifted toward Brandon. "Good evening." Brandon forced a smile. "Arthur, did not realize you were invited." Arthur glanced at me once before answering. "I was not. I came with him." That sentence landed heavier than it should have. Rebecca looked between us, confusion slowly replacing confidence in her eyes. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. 3 years ago, she left me standing alone in our kitchen because she believed success belonged to men like Brandon. Men with penthouses and private clubs and polished shoes untouched by real work. She never understood that wealth and value are not always born in the same rooms. Sometimes they start in places that smell like gasoline and overheated engines. A waiter passed carrying champagne, and I took one glass from the tray while musicians played softly somewhere near the dance floor. Brandon laughed suddenly, too loud, too rehearsed. Well, he said, clapping one hand against my shoulder. Looks like life turned around for you after all. There it was. That tiny edge underneath the joke. The same condescending tone wealthy men use when they believe success is temporary on somebody else, but permanent on them. I sipped the champagne slowly before answering. Funny thing about life, I said quietly. Sometimes the worst day you ever survive becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. Rebecca stared at me without blinking now. Not at my suit. Not at the car outside. At me. Like she was trying to figure out when the mechanic she abandoned disappeared, and this version took his place. The truth was he never disappeared. He just stopped asking for permission to become more. Rebecca opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but before the words came out, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly near the stage and soft piano music rolled through the speakers. Guests began drifting toward their tables, while servers carried plates of filet mignon and glasses of Napa Valley Cabernet beneath the chandeliers. The wedding coordinator announced the ceremony would begin in 15 minutes. Brandon adjusted his cufflinks and forced another smile onto his face, but I could see it now. The uncertainty. Tiny movements always reveal more than words. He kept glancing toward Arthur Mercer like a man checking weather reports before a storm. "Excuse us for a second," Rebecca said suddenly, touching my arm lightly. Her fingers were cold. She guided me a few feet away from the crowd, near one of the massive ballroom windows overlooking downtown Dallas glowing against the night sky. Rain streaked the glass in silver lines while traffic moved below like rivers of red and white lights. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It felt strange standing beside her again after all these years. Familiar and foreign at the same time. "What is going on?" she asked quietly. Not angry. Not emotional. Careful. Like somebody stepping on a thin ice. I looked out at the skyline instead of directly at her. "You seem nervous," I said. "You know what I mean." Her voice tightened slightly. Arthur Mercer does not just show up at weddings with random guests. I almost smiled at that. 3 years ago, Rebecca used to complain when I watched business interviews on television while eating takeout on the couch. Said rich people bored her unless they owned yachts or private islands. Now she recognized investment executives on site. Funny how priorities evolve. "Life changes," I answered calmly. "People change with it." She folded her arms against the white satin of her dress and studied me carefully. "No," she said softly. "You changed before the money. I can tell." That line caught me off guard because it was probably the most honest thing she had said to me in years. The old Ethan would have walked into this ballroom desperate to prove something. Desperate to be seen. Desperate to make her regret leaving. But somewhere between sleeping on a mattress beside my garage office and building a company worth hundreds of millions, I stopped needing revenge to feel valuable. Success does strange things to pain. It does not erase it. It just gives it quieter rooms to live in. Rebecca looked down at the diamond ring on her finger for a long moment before speaking again. "I heard things about you over the last couple years," she admitted. "Investments, shipping contracts, private equity. I did not know what was true. Most people did not." "Why keep it hidden?" she asked. I finally looked directly at her then. Because the first time I had nothing, people showed me exactly how they saw me. Her expression shifted slightly after that. Not guilt exactly. Something heavier. Understanding, maybe too late to matter. Across the ballroom, Brandon laughed loudly at something one of his partners said, but his eyes kept drifting toward us every few seconds. Watching. Calculating. A man trying to measure danger before he understood where it was coming from. Rebecca followed my gaze toward him. "He thinks you are here to embarrass him," she said quietly. "Am I supposed to be worried?" I took a slow sip of champagne while the city lights reflected against the glass behind us. "That depends," I answered. "How much do you know about Brandon's finances?" The color faded from her face so subtly most people would never notice it. But I did. Because deep down, somewhere beneath the designer gown and perfect makeup and polished social smile, Rebecca Hayes suddenly realized she might be standing beside the wrong man all over again. Rebecca stared at me for another second before the wedding coordinator called her name from across the ballroom. 5 minutes, Rebecca." The room buzzed with soft laughter and clinking glasses while photographers moved between tables capturing expensive smiles beneath the chandeliers. She glanced toward Brandon again, then back at me like she was standing between two versions of her future and realizing one of them might already be collapsing. "What did you mean by that?" she asked quietly. "About his finances." I rolled the champagne glass slowly. Between my fingers. I mean, the man you are about to marry has been running out of cash for almost a year. Her face tightened immediately. Tiny reaction. Fast inhale. Eyes sharpening. People only react like that when fear lands somewhere already vulnerable. That is not true, she said too quickly. Brandon's company just announced 3 new developments in Austin. Announcements are cheap, I answered calmly. Debt is expensive. The silence between us stretched long enough for the string quartet to finish one song and begin another. Somewhere behind us, guests laughed near the open bar, while waiters carried lobster tails across the ballroom under silver lids reflecting gold light. The whole place smelled like money and roses and polished marble. Rebecca lowered her voice. How do you know any of this? Because my company owns the bank paper tied to 2 of Brandon's projects. That hit harder than I expected. I watched her posture shift slightly, like the floor beneath her heels had tilted half an inch. 3 years ago, Rebecca would have dismissed anything I said about finance because mechanics were not supposed to understand leverage, acquisitions, or capital structure. But tonight she could not dismiss me anymore. Not with Arthur Mercer standing 20 feet away talking to senators and hedge fund managers like old friends. You are serious, she whispered. Completely. Across the ballroom, Brandon finally excused himself from his group and started walking toward us with controlled confidence. He smiled while moving through the crowd, but his eyes looked different now. Tighter, colder, like somebody trying to solve a problem before investors notice smoke coming out of the building. Everything all right over here? He asked smoothly when he reached us. Rebecca opened her mouth, but I answered first. We were just talking about business. Brandon laughed lightly. At my wedding? That sounds dangerous. Most dangerous things look harmless at first, I said. He studied me for a moment after that. Long enough for the fake friendliness to thin around the edges. You know, Brandon said, adjusting his cufflinks again. I have been meaning to ask what exactly it is. You do now. Everybody keeps speaking like you are some kind of mystery. There it was. The real question underneath all the polite conversation tonight. Men like Brandon can tolerate wealth. What they cannot tolerate is uncertainty. I looked toward the giant ballroom windows where rain streaked the Dallas skyline in silver lines beneath the city lights. Transportation, I said simply. Logistics. Infrastructure acquisitions. Mostly boring things people ignore until supply chains stop moving. Brandon forced a smile. Sounds profitable. Very. Another silence settled between us. Heavy this time. Rebecca looked back and forth between us like someone watching a poker game without knowing who already held the winning hand. Then Brandon's phone buzzed in his pocket. One vibration, then another, then a third almost immediately after. He frowned slightly and pulled it out. I saw the exact moment his stomach dropped. Tiny changes tell the truth faster than words ever do. The blood drained from his face while his eyes scanned the screen once, then again. The ballroom noise around us blurred into background static while Brandon read whatever waited in that message. He looked up slowly at me after that, and for the first time all night, the confidence disappeared completely. Excuse me, he muttered suddenly before walking away fast toward a side hallway near the ballroom entrance. Rebecca watched him leave with growing panic written all over her expression. Then she turned back toward me carefully. What did you do? She asked. I stared into the champagne bubbles rising quietly against the crystal glass before answering. Nothing tonight, I said softly. This started months ago. Rebecca kept staring at the hallway where Brandon disappeared while the ballroom continued moving around us like nothing had happened. That is the strange thing about life-changing moments. Most of the room never notices them while they are happening. Guests kept sipping wine. Servers kept refilling champagne. The string quartet continued playing soft jazz beneath the chandeliers, while somewhere near the dance floor, an elderly couple laughed over wedding photos displayed on giant digital screens. But standing beside me near the window, Rebecca looked like someone hearing cracks spread through ice beneath her feet. Months, she repeated quietly. What does that mean? I set the champagne glass onto a passing tray and adjusted the sleeve of my jacket. It means Brandon's company started bleeding cash almost a year ago. Interest rates climbed. Investors got nervous. Projects slowed down. He covered losses by moving debt between subsidiaries and borrowing against developments that were already over-leveraged. Her face tightened more with every sentence. No, she whispered. He told me the market was temporary. He said expansion always creates pressure. Pressure is one thing, I answered calmly. Desperation is another. The ballroom lights reflected softly across her eyes now, but the confidence she wore earlier was fading fast. I remembered another version of Rebecca years ago sitting beside me in our old pickup truck outside a diner in Fort Worth. Back then she used to dream out loud about beach houses and skyline penthouses and vacations in Italy like money itself could heal whatever emptiness she carried inside. I used to think ambition was attractive. I just did not realize some people eventually love the destination more than the people traveling with them. Why are you telling me this? She asked suddenly. You could have stayed away tonight. I thought about that question for a second longer than she expected. Truth was, there was a time I imagined this moment differently. Angrier. Petty. I used to replay the divorce in my head while lying awake in my tiny garage apartment wondering how somebody who once promised forever could walk away so cleanly. But pain changes shape over time. At first it burns. Then it hardens. Eventually, it becomes perspective. Because whether you believe it or not, I said quietly, I never wanted to destroy you. Her eyes flickered at that, a small crack opening beneath years of pride. Before she could answer, Brandon reappeared from the hallway, moving much faster than before. The calm businessman image was gone now. His tie sat crooked beneath his collar, and his jaw looked tight enough to crack teeth. He walked straight toward us without smiling. Can I talk to you? He said to me sharply. Rebecca glanced between us immediately. Brandon, what happened? He ignored her completely. That told me everything. Men only ignore the woman they are about to marry when fear becomes larger than image. I followed him a few feet away near the ballroom bar where guests pretended not to stare while absolutely staring. Brandon lowered his voice. What exactly did you buy? There it was. No more fake politeness. No more jokes. Just panic wrapped in expensive fabric. I looked at him evenly. Cole Development Holdings officially transferred majority control this afternoon. His face drained again. That is impossible. No, I answered. It was expensive. Different thing. His breathing slowed like he was forcing himself not to unravel in public. Across the ballroom, Rebecca stood frozen beneath the chandeliers watching us while guests whispered quietly behind champagne glasses. Brandon leaned closer. You planned this, he muttered. You came here to humiliate me. I looked past him toward the skyline, glowing through rain-covered windows. You invited humiliation into your life long before I arrived, I said softly. I just happened to be standing here when the bill came due. Brandon stared at me for another long second, like he was waiting for the punchline to appear. But there was no joke hiding behind my words. Just numbers, signatures, and consequences moving through boardrooms faster than pride could stop them. Around us, the ballroom kept glowing beneath warm gold light, while guests whispered behind careful smiles, pretending not to notice the tension spreading through the room. That is the thing about wealthy circles. People smell collapse before they hear it. Brandon straightened his tie slowly and lowered his voice another level. You think owning shares gives you power over me? He asked. You bought paper. I built the company. I almost admired the denial. Men who spend years calling themselves self-made rarely survive the moment they realize ownership and control are not always the same thing. You built projects, I answered calmly. Lawyers built structures. Investors built leverage. Banks built deadlines. His jaw tightened again. What do you want? There was at last. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear finally asking honest questions. I looked across the ballroom toward Rebecca standing alone near the dance floor now. Guests moved carefully around her, like people sensing a storm without understanding where lightning would land. She still looked beautiful beneath the chandelier light, but something in her expression had changed completely. The certainty was gone. I do not want anything from you, I said quietly. This was business. Brandon let out a short, bitter laugh. Do not insult my intelligence. You buy my company the week of my wedding and somehow show up here pretending it is coincidence. You invited me, I reminded him. Rebecca sent the invitation. That landed harder than expected. Because deep down Brandon understood exactly what kind of woman Rebecca was. He knew she invited me to prove something. To display her upgrade. To let the mechanic watch her marry money. The problem was money shifts direction faster than loyalty ever does. Before Brandon could respond, Arthur Mercer approached us again holding a tablet in one hand. His expression remained calm, professional, detached. The face of a man used to delivering information that changes lives. Sorry to interrupt, Arthur said smoothly, though his timing felt surgical. Brandon, the board meeting has been moved forward to Monday morning. Emergency restructuring vote. Brandon's face went completely still. What restructuring? Arthur glanced toward me briefly before answering. The new controlling partners believe immediate leadership changes may be necessary to stabilize investor confidence. Silence hit harder than music after that. Even the ballroom noise seemed farther away now. Brandon stared at Arthur, then at me, like he suddenly realized every conversation tonight had been happening 3 steps ahead of him. Leadership changes, he repeated quietly. You are removing me. Arthur gave the kind of diplomatic smile lawyers charge by the hour to perfect. Nothing has been finalized yet. Brandon looked at me again after that, and for the first time since. I arrived, the arrogance disappeared completely. All that remained was a man standing in an expensive suit watching the life he built slip through fingers too slow to hold it. Across the ballroom, Rebecca began walking toward us carefully. Not fast, not dramatic, just drawn by instinct toward whatever truth was finally surfacing beneath all the polished lies tonight. The string quartet shifted into a slower song, while rain rolled softly against the giant ballroom windows overlooking downtown Dallas. Rebecca stopped beside Brandon and looked between all 3 of us. Tell me what is happening, she said quietly. Nobody answered immediately. Brandon could not. Arthur would not. So her eyes settled on me. Funny how that happened. 3 years ago, she looked at me like I represented failure. Tonight, I was the only person in the room calm enough to tell her the truth. I met her eyes steadily beneath the chandelier light. The man you are about to marry, I said softly, does not own his future anymore. Rebecca looked at Brandon immediately after I said it, searching his face for denial, reassurance, anything solid enough to stop the panic spreading behind her eyes. But Brandon did not answer right away. That silence told her more than words ever could. People think betrayal always arrives through lies. Sometimes it arrives through hesitation. The ballroom suddenly felt smaller around us. Tighter. Guests nearby pretended to focus on their drinks while quietly listening to every word. The string quartet kept playing beneath the chandeliers, but the music sounded distant now, like it belonged to another room entirely. Rebecca stepped closer to Brandon. Tell me he is wrong, she said softly. Brandon ran one hand through his hair and exhaled hard through his nose before forcing another corporate smile onto his face. This is temporary, he said carefully. Markets shift. Investors panic. Ethan is making it sound worse than it is. Arthur Mercer remained perfectly calm beside us. Men like Arthur spend entire careers watching empires rise and collapse between lunch meetings. Nothing surprised him anymore. Brandon, Arthur said professionally, the lenders triggered. Accelerated review clauses this afternoon. The board wants immediate restructuring before opening Monday. Rebecca blinked slowly like her mind was trying to reject the sentence before accepting it. Restructuring? She repeated. What does that even mean? Brandon answered too fast this time. It means nothing if people stop overreacting. But even he no longer sounded convinced. I watched Rebecca study the man she was about to marry, and for the first time tonight, she looked past the tailored tuxedo and polished confidence. She saw fear. Real fear. The kind money cannot hide once it reaches the eyes. Funny thing about image. It works perfectly until reality arrives. One of Brandon's business partners approached nervously from across the ballroom, holding a phone in his hand. Brandon, he said quietly, we need to talk. Now. Brandon snapped immediately. Not here. The partner hesitated before lowering his voice further. The Dallas project just got frozen. Brandon closed his eyes for half a second. Tiny movement. Huge meaning. Rebecca heard it all. Every piece. Every crack spreading wider beneath the perfect future she thought she bought herself. She looked back at me then, and suddenly I saw something I never expected to see again from her. Regret. Not shallow embarrassment. Real regret. Heavy enough to bend posture and quiet a room. You knew all this before tonight, she whispered. Weeks ago. Months ago, I corrected softly. Rain continued sliding down the giant ballroom windows behind us, while downtown Dallas glowed silver and gold against the dark sky. Guests had stopped pretending not to watch by now. Conversations lowered. Phones disappeared quietly into purses and jacket pockets. Nobody wanted evidence they witnessed another rich man unravel in public. Brandon looked at me again, with anger finally overtaking panic. You could have warned me, he muttered. I almost laughed at that. 3 years ago, I stood in our kitchen while Rebecca left me for the version of success standing beside her now. Nobody warned me then either. Nobody paused the damage long enough to protect my dignity. Life does not work that way. I am not responsible for decisions you made before I arrived, I answered calmly. Rebecca lowered her eyes toward the diamond ring on her finger. It suddenly looked heavier than before beneath the ballroom lights. Brandon, she asked quietly, how bad is it really? He did not answer immediately. And in relationships, silence is usually where truth enters first. Finally, he looked at her with exhausted eyes and said the one sentence she never imagined hearing tonight. I do not know yet. That hit harder than every financial term, every acquisition document, every whispered conversation in the room. Because Rebecca Hayes built her entire future around certainty, around status, around choosing the man she believed could never fall, and standing there beneath $10,000 worth of wedding flowers. She realized the mechanic she abandoned was now the only person in the ballroom who looked completely unshaken. The wedding coordinator finally approached with a strained smile that looked one bad sentence away from collapse. We are ready for the ceremony, she announced softly, though nobody around us moved immediately. The ballroom had changed completely in the last 20 minutes. Earlier it felt warm, celebratory, polished. Now the air carried tension beneath the perfume and candlelight. Conversations stayed low. People checked phones discreetly beneath tablecloths. Investors whispered to spouses. Attorneys avoided eye contact. That is how fast confidence dies when money starts bleeding in public. Brandon stood frozen beside Rebecca, staring at the floor for a second too long before forcing himself upright again. Pride is a strange thing. Even drowning men straighten their ties. The ceremony is still happening, he said firmly, almost like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Rebecca looked at him, then at me, and I could see the war happening behind her eyes. 3 years ago, she believed success meant choosing certainty over struggle. Tonight's certainty was cracking apart beneath chandeliers and wedding flowers while the man she once called a failure stood calmly untouched beside her. Arthur Mercer checked his watch politely before speaking. I should leave you all to the evening, he said. Then he turned toward me. Ethan, I will call you tomorrow regarding the transition schedule. Brandon closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Transition schedule. Such clean words for the collapse of control. Arthur shook my hand once and disappeared into the crowd while waiters continued serving expensive dinners to guests pretending this was still a normal wedding. Rebecca stared at me quietly after Arthur left. You really build all this? She asked softly. Not the money, not the companies. Something bigger. The composure, the confidence, the life she never imagined possible from the man she abandoned. I nodded once. Not overnight. Rain tapped gently against the giant ballroom windows behind us while downtown lights shimmered across the glass. Rebecca's eyes looked different now. Softer, tired, like somebody finally understanding the cost of chasing appearances for too long. I thought leaving was the smart decision, she admitted quietly. At the time, I really believed it. I studied her face for a second before answering. Funny thing was, I no longer hated her. Somewhere along the years between rebuilding my life and learning my own worth, the anger burned itself out. What remained was clarity. You did what made sense to you, I said calmly. You chose the version of success you trusted most. She lowered her eyes. And you? I looked around the ballroom one last time. The flowers, the crystal, the expensive smiles slowly fading beneath uncomfortable truth. Then I looked back at her. I stopped needing other people to tell me who I was. That landed quietly between us. No drama, no raised voices, just truth finally arriving after years of noise. Across the room, Brandon stood surrounded by nervous business partners whispering over glowing phone screens while guests avoided looking directly at him. The image was already cracking apart in real time. Rebecca glanced toward him, then back at me again. Do you ever think things could have been different? She asked. I thought about our old kitchen in Fort Worth. Cheap coffee at 6 in the morning. Country music playing through broken speakers. Her laughing barefoot across cold tile. Floors before ambition turned love into competition. For a second, the memories hit harder than I expected. Then they passed. Maybe, I answered honestly. But different and better are not always the same thing. Her eyes shimmered slightly beneath the chandelier light, but she kept her composure. She always did. I picked up my coat from the nearby chair, and slipped it on slowly. Ethan, she said quietly before I turned away. I paused. I made a mistake. The old version of me would have waited years to hear those words. But standing there now, they felt strangely small compared to everything life had already taught me. I gave her a calm smile beneath the golden ballroom lights. No, I said softly. You made a choice. Then I walked toward the ballroom exit while rain fell over downtown Dallas, and the woman who once left me for success stood perfectly still, realizing too late that she had been looking at it the wrong way the entire time.